parades and public events, but are there any other interesting techniques that you use that are kind of outside the box for grabbing people's attention or getting them to understand what's going on?
Well, I think there's so many different ways to communicate. I mean, ultimately, it is getting in front of people and being heard by people. It was really, and it's still a tool that's used by many politicians. Many in Virginia use this, but we did this thing called a listening tour each summer. So the governor spent, and if one has the time to do this sort of thing, it was just surprising the first year we did it how well it worked, and so we did it every year after that. But the governor would load up and some members of the staff on an RV or a van and then the governor would travel around. We have a lot of different festivals throughout Virginia, the Cantaloupe Festival and the Oyster Festival, and they all generally occur in the summertime when all these things are ripe and when they're being harvested. And, there were pork barbecue festivals.
There's a garlic festival.
There's garlic festivals. I mean, all of those kinds of events where people are assembling anyway. So we didn't have to build events, meaning we didn't have to develop an event for every location where we were traveling. We went to events that were already occurring during a period when people are assembling, when they're outdoors, when they're warm, when the climate's warm and people are out and active and happy. And we used those just natural assemblings of people as forums for them to meet the governor. And for us it was there were just pre-made crowds. They were going to be there. We went to the most popular events where where there's going to be high attendance. And then we also, one can never underestimate, even today, for all of our advanced media, one should never underestimate the importance of a local newspaper. Everybody reads the local newspaper.
I read my local newspaper.
Yeah. When you're not reading the Washington Post or the New York Times, you will still read your local newspaper.
You need to know what Aunt Bessie's cow is doing down
You
the street.
absolutely do. And everybody wants to know it. And if you can get an article in that newspaper, now you're not going to get wide distribution, and you're going to have to do it in a lot of different places, but where you get an article like that, everybody's going to read it. And time again, we would get so many more comments from people who had seen a little blurb, a little picture of the governor. And that becomes very personal to people because they think you expect a governor or a president or a member of parliament or a member of Congress or whatever, you expect them to be in big newspapers. You expect to see them on television. So it's really meaningful to a person when you see that, oh, he was in my hometown, or I saw him at the festival, or I saw her at my local town hall meeting. Whatever it might be. And we would just form a route around the state, sort of linking together all of these festivals and events that were going on.
Now the listening part. Did you go there with a list of questions that you wanted people to respond to, or did you just let them talk about how did you start the conversations?
Yeah.
Well,
that's an important detail.
Yeah.
Because in effect, we were crashing the party. Okay, I don't know if people are familiar with that term, but we were just coming in on an event that somebody else
flash mobbing or
yeah,
something.
People had already arranged it. So the governor was careful not to try to co-opt or take over the agenda. So he was there basically just as a citizen and people were just offered the opportunity to talk to him about whatever they wanted to talk about. There was no agenda, and so you can imagine we got a little bit of everything. often people don't understand the sort of the differences in responsibilities between local and state and federal government under a federal system. People just know that they're government officials, and so whether it's a pothole in the road, or sometimes they don't even understand that their telephone, for whatever reason, they might be having trouble with it, all the way up to complaining about or needing assistance with Social Security or passports, things that are at our federal level that really don't have a great deal to do with state government. But nonetheless, the governor, and I think it's important for any elected official, because people don't necessarily know that difference.
Right.
The governor always tried to help them.
So did he have constituent reps and people
did.
that would
Us.
be able to step in and kind
Yeah.
of like bridge that?
Absolutely. We were traveling with him, and you knew the answer was not, that's not my responsibility. That would never be an acceptable answer. Because people didn't come for a lecture on state government. They came there, and they're attending, and they see you, and you're offering to listen to them. We didn't put any parameters on it. And so the government took very seriously any sort of requests. Now, we were careful in how we took those requests back to various levels of government, because to call a local government office when one is in the governor's office and say, why isn't this pothole being fixed? You had to be careful and do it in a diplomatic way. But those potholes usually got fixed because people generally weren't aware of it, didn't know about it. And so it was not the case that one level or another of government wasn't helping that person. It's just that they had not communicated it to the appropriate level of government.
Did any pieces of policy or ideas for policy come from those visits around
Often.
Virginia?
Yeah, often. There were a number of I'll just make this story very short. The short answer is yes, many. He had a number of signature proposals on which he was elected. And one of the things that he did before implementing, he didn't just get elected and wrote legislation or asked members of the General Assembly to write legislation, boom, it passed. We actually had to build, even though he had been elected on many of these ideas, they were still ones which had to be sold to the public. The details of it had to be communicated, and then the public had to be convinced that it was the right direction. So, very much like the listening tours, as a matter of public policy, he formed a number of commissions, which were comprised of citizens from around Virginia. We had a commission, for instance, it was called the Blue Ribbon Schools Commission.
Yes.
Which ultimately led to the adoption and revision of the state's standards of learning, implemented a whole new set of requirements that public schools in Virginia would have to meet. But before we got to that point, he created what was called the Blue Ribbon Commission on Schools. Citizens, teachers, students, principals, members of the school board, they were all part of this commission.
And they were all equals.
They were all equals.
Yeah.
Everybody had the same vote. And they, very much like the listening tour, went around the state and held public meetings, public hearings. These were formal. We were coming to those localities with an agenda this time, and asking people to comment on it and help shape the policy direction. So we did that many times. One of the first commissions he formed was a kind of, he called it a strike force for kind of paring down and making state government work more efficiently. And very much like the commission that was formed for schools, did the same thing on state government, just to get input from the public on how they felt state government could be run more efficiently.